Hey everybody, my name is Gavin McKay and I'm here with Paul Como. Did I say that right? Como?
Yeah, Camo. Perfect.
French? Wow. We're here to talk limited magic. And limited magic is very near and dear to my heart. I know it's very near and dear to your heart, Paul. We've been both playing I've been playing on and off since I was about 16 years old, but specifically limited magic since about 3 years ago. I got back in and really amped up, how much I love this game. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Paul, when did you start playing Magic?
So I started playing Magic in general in 1994. It was
Hmm.
during the summer, and I actually discovered Magic because I was really stoked to play this new trading card game called the Star Trek Customizable Card Game. And I went to my local game store and I said, "Hey, do you have the Star Trek game?" I was so excited. Star Trek was like my favorite thing when I was like a kid. And I went in and they didn't have that because it didn't come out until sometime in the fall that year. So
you're you're
months and
you're
months
ahead of the
went by.
curve. Ahead of the curve.
Yeah, it was in a magazine, so I was like, "Oh yes, I got to get this." But the
Hmm.
guy that was there was like, "Oh, if you want to check out this Star Trek game and
Yeah,
it's not available, how about you check out this Magic game? This is
yeah.
kind of like what started it all."
Hmm.
And he showed us booster packs that were out. When I got into it, that summer was kind of the tail end of Revised. You
Hmm.
heard rumors that unlimited cards were still around there. The local game
Yep.
store that I went to still had Legends packs for sale.
Wow.
They were $11
Should have
each.
picked up should have picked up quite a few of those and just kept them in your binder.
Well, $11 is a lot of money when you're like 13 years old
That's
and
true.
don't have a
That's
job,
true.
you
Adjusted
know?
for
So
inflation.
revised packs for $4 was a pretty sweet deal.
Those are
So
still, quite a pretty penny these days anyway. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Nowadays, hundreds.
And when did you start getting interested in specifically limited? Because to me, that's like the core of Magic and how I love to play it.
Same here, 100%. I like to say that I got into playing limited during Invasion.
Hmm.
Technically, I probably had did my first draft during Masks block just prior to that, but where
Hmm.
I really started learning like how does limited work? How do you build a sealed deck? How do you draft? Like not necessarily get good, but just like get into the flow of things was
Yeah,
definitely Invasion. And
yeah.
then it took me like Odyssey block and then Onslaught block before things
Hmm.
really started to click and I was like doing well, winning matches consistently,
Hmm.
things like
Hmm.
that.
So when you say like when you're building a deck, when you're trying to come up with the 40 cards, because let's face it, for most Magic players, the formats that they're most familiar with are constructed,
Yep,
and and obviously the biggest one of them all, Commander, EDH. This is a much smaller deck. Just
yep,
straight up, it's a 40 card deck minimum. 40 card minimum, and the problem solving aspect on the fly, I think, is what makes me the most excited. It's always something new. Uh, so let's dive into it a little bit. Let's talk about what makes
okay,
limited so great and why we want to talk about that. Because for me, the best thing in life is basically opening these packs and having an aha moment, or having a moment where I'm like, I know exactly what I'm doing, because it's half luck, not half luck. There's a little bit of a luck element there, but you can see that there are very skilled drafters. There are very skilled players who can kind of, use this format to showcase their knowledge and their talent on how they can actually build the decks, first of all, because when you are building a sealed pool or you're building a draft pool, you're making choices all the time. You're making choices when you pick
absolutely.
the cards. You're making choices when you're designing your deck strategy. There are some very, very interesting decks that you can't really find elsewhere in Limited, because when it comes to a constructed format, I think the best way to put it is Commander is about personality, You get to take a legend and put your personality into that deck and figure out what you like to do. And in constructed, like 60 card formats, like modern and standard, you're going to have a meta game. You're going to have the decks that are just the best of the best, and you're going to be playing against those. So there's not as much variance. With limited, you play against pretty much every single type of deck you can have within that set. And you're going to need to have a core understanding of the rules of Magic and the types of things that can happen on a game to game basis and use that knowledge to gain incremental advantage. Because again, 40 cards is not a lot. You
No,
are
you,
more
you're
likely
you're
to
hitting on
deck.
a lot of things that I
Yeah.
100% agree with. What I would say is that I'm with you on what you're saying, and I want to kind of roll with that, and I want to elaborate on
Mm-hmm.
that because
Let's do it.
I do think that when you look at constructed formats, you definitely end up with like, well, Commander is about personality. Other constructed 60 card formats are about the metagame. What are the rock, paper, scissors of the format?
Mm-hmm.
I like to think of limited as mostly a format where everyone is playing rocks,
Mm.
and it's the smart players that are figuring out how to build paper,
Yeah.
and the next level players beyond that are figuring out how to build scissors because they know that everyone else that they are hoping to beat is, playing paper. And it's
Mm-hmm.
an ebb and flow that you'll see back and forth. And you can look at
Yeah,
that when
that's
you
a great
look at
analogy.
17 lands data, for example, and you can look
Mm-hmm.
at a week one format and you can see who's
Mm-hmm.
identified what the rock is. What
Mm-hmm.
is the thing that smashes most other decks that don't have a cohesive game plan
Mm-hmm.
and are just a pile of 40 cards?
And it evolves, doesn't it? It
It does.
evolves
You can
over
definitely
time.
see it evolve. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what I like about limited, especially nowadays, is that
Yeah.
there is an evolution that happens, and people that draft a lot and play sealed a lot and play limited a lot in general, they can keep up with that and watch
Mm-hmm.
the ebb and flow and see how formats change.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of like formats and how formats have changed, how has your experience with the play boosters versus the draft boosters been? And can you sort of talk about that a little bit? And, I know Wizards made this change pretty recently. If you want to go into what the change actually was, and then how you've sort of seen it shake out in real time, how you can actually, the game is changing. The game is changing a lot, especially these days where the price of sets is going up.
So I want to make sure my facts are right, and we'll have to double check. But off the top of my head, I
Mm-hmm.
believe that the main change is one: you see one less common per pack. There's now
Mm-hmm.
14 cards instead of 15 cards. They also, in
Yep.
terms of set design, change the number of commons and the number of uncommons. So there's now
Or the
more
possibility
uncommons.
of
Yeah,
commons or
so there's now a
uncommons. Yep.
larger pool of potential uncommons that you can
Mm-hmm.
open. One of the bigger things that I heard a comment somewhere on, and I don't want to say that it was Mark Rosewater necessarily, but I'm going to say it was Mark Rosewater, and they kind of eliminated from my understanding, they eliminated the useless chaff. They eliminated
Mm.
the
I
commons
think
and
it was actually
uncommons
Gavin
that
Verhey.
nobody's going to play ever for
Yeah, I
any
think I,
reason.
I think it was Gavin Verhey actually that said that.
Okay.
I watched the podcast that he was on, Good Morning Magic, that he announced that. He said that the design philosophy was they wanted to remove they wanted every pick to matter. And so they wanted to remove a card so that when it came to the last few pickups, they weren't, you weren't just taking literally any card or a rare or whatever to just take it. That every card could potentially make your deck and be playable.
It's great that you word it that way and talk about it that way, because I want to bring up an example from my favorite limited format of all time is Invasion Block, Invasion,
Mm-hmm.
Plane Shift, and Apocalypse as a
Mm-hmm.
block. I actually built
Yep.
a cube to simulate that format. One of the things that everybody who's kind of played that format realizes is that there's a card called Tangarth's Glare, and I'm going to get you the actual text of that card momentarily.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like,
Can you actually share that on the screen?
I had no
Good
idea
old
how
T
to
Glare.
spell Tangarth's Glare. So this is a card from
I mean, that's
Apocalypse.
one thing. That's one thing that definitely sometimes when I'm using Scryfall, I'm like, is it an E, an A, or an I? I'm not sure.
I just type the first couple letters that I know, hit space, and then type the next word that I know, and
Yeah,
press go and hope we get lucky. And
cross your
usually we
fingers.
do, and other times I get things that make no sense, but that's
Yeah,
because the computer is using logic and the Paul is not.
yeah. So the Paul needs to use more logic like a computer.
Indeed, indeed. Okay,
Okay,
so
Tangrus
Kangar's
Glare,
Glare is a card in Apocalypse.
sorcery. Look at the top three cards of target opponent's library, then put them back in any order. That player looks at the top three cards of your library, then puts them back in any order.
Gavin,
Interesting.
it has no text. It is
Oh,
one red mana, do absolutely nothing relevant. It is not something you want to see when you get to the Apocalypse pack, and it's pack 3, and you're scrambling for playables
yeah,
because something happened. You know,
sure.
um,
I mean, that's literally the most do nothing card I think I've ever seen.
exactly,
It literally, it's a waste of one mana.
exactly. It's a waste of a card, and rectangles are important. You know, every
Yeah,
card needs to do something,
every card
and I do
matters.
love getting back to play boosters. I love that change. I
Mm.
do love that commons matter. Like
Has that been your
I love
experience?
commons.
Because
Uh,
you've played Magic for a very, very long time, and you've been through a lot of changes. That Wizards of the Coast has changed pretty much every facet of the game in some way, shape, or form. This is really one of the first times in like the last 10 years that they've changed an actual physical product to reflect a gameplay change. And I want to know what your impressions of it are. And I have some thoughts of my own, from a financial standpoint, but also from a playability standpoint. Has it achieved the goal? It's been out for 3 sets now. No, all of 2024's sets were play boosters, starting with Karlov Manor in
yep.
the early part of this year. And have you seen that change be good, bad, neutral? What are your thoughts on the actual execution of this game plan? Has it worked?
So I think from a limited playability standpoint, it's made limited interesting, but it has also caused a spike in the power level to a certain extent because
Mm-hmm.
one of the side effects of the play booster experience is that we are seeing more rares in packs, which used to never be
Mm-hmm.
the case. You know,
Right.
you'd have one rare per pack. Occasionally, oh, hey, I got a foil. There's like one in the box or two in the box or
Mm-hmm.
however many the odds
Mm-hmm.
were back in the day. It was a very rare encounter to see a foil and then
Mythic,
have it be a
even.
foil rare. And oh, I've got two rares and I have to make a decision. Now you play Foundations
Mm-hmm.
Draft and you open three rares, two rares and a
Yeah, and
mythic
you're passing
even,
two of
and then
them.
you have to decide which one is the best. What am I taking? What am I
Yeah.
guaranteed putting the next two people in the draft to my left in pack
Mm-hmm.
one? Or
Right.
pack two, what am I causing the person to my right to hard pivot to because
Mm-hmm.
I'm shipping them this insane bomb?
Yeah. I've speaking exactly from that experience, I've had a pack where I've had very, very, very good cards of one color, and I distinctly remember making the decision not to pick those cards specifically because I knew the signal that I was sending to the person to my left or to my right was going to be that this color is open, and then we would be fighting for the rest of the draft over those colors. I saw that there was only one color that had one very, very good card in it, and it was just that. It wasn't a replaceable effect, so I was happy taking it. But the end result was that lane was open all draft, and it made my deck so much better. If I picked, let's say it was white, if I picked that white, maybe mythic or bomb, there's a chance that that one card could carry me. But a deck is 40 cards. You need to make sure you're making those correct decisions when you're drafting so that you can set yourself up for future success. I don't think enough people, when they're drafting, think about that aspect of it because it's a lot. There's a lot to remember. There's a lot to know, and there's a lot to gamble on. You
Well,
know,
there's also hard. It's also a hard decision to make. You know,
it is. It was a
generally the rule of thumb is generally draft good cards. You know,
yep.
so you're almost
Generally,
sometimes going against the grain, drafting not the best card in the pack, and that's a really tough decision to make. That
it's
comes with
so hard.
experience and recognizing that yes, I might take Celestial Armor. I think is the name of the equipment in
Mm-hmm.
white in foundations that
It
is
is.
sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if there's 3 or 4 other white cards in that pack, you might settle for something else. You might just
Yeah.
take the refute and say it's the only blue card in the pack.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather play white given that I think it's the best color, but I'll take the refute because I know that I'm setting myself up because
Yeah.
nobody else to my left is going to be drafting blue.
Yeah. Another quick example, exactly what you're saying is it matters when you make those decisions too, because pick one, pack one. Pick one, pack one is a probably the most consequential, inconsequential pick of the draft because you could get the best bomb in the set. You could get the best rare or mythic uncommon, and you could say, oh, I'm drafting this and I'm going to force whatever is happening. I'm going to force whatever color that pick is in. And that could be wrong. That could be completely wrong because the person to your left of you could also open something in that color, and the person to the right of you could also open something in that color, and you could never see anything else in those color combinations for the rest of the draft. I fell into that trap with the green and black elf lord. I don't remember her name
Lathril,
right
maybe?
now. Yeah, Lathril, and basically locked into Golgari and didn't see what I needed to see, which is that red and blue were actually the most open that I've ever seen in my entire life, and ended up with a very, very mediocre deck. So, subpar deck. It was not very good. And so, learning to let go of your pick one, pack one is actually a very good thing. Maybe we shouldn't call the podcast that. I don't know. Pick one, pack one is actually not the most important pick.
Well, it's very important in that you establish the tone of your draft from that,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes drafting is 20% making correct decisions and 80% vibes. If it feels good, you go with it,
I've noticed with the play boosters, going back to that point, that sometimes I won't make an actual decision on my colors and my color pairings until pick five or pick six. And the reason for that is you don't really have a clear distinction, especially with the amount of rares, mythics, and uncommons that are in these sets. If people are taking those, there could be 3 or 4 picks that are just, the person's just taking the best card and didn't actually pick a lane or pick a color yet. And so once things actually start to settle, is actually around pick 7, 8, or 9, I found with these play boosters. In the past, in the draft boosters, you can usually find your lane or at least find what other people are drafting a lot sooner than that. I would say pick 5 or pick 6. You could usually figure out what the person to your right is doing. And that would give you a little bit of a sense of direction for yourself. Because again, because all of these cards are playable, it makes it a lot harder to read signals and also to wheel. Do you want to talk about wheeling for a bit, or do you want to keep talking about
Well,
these play boosters?
before we get to wheeling, what I would add to what you're saying is that I've ended pack one in 5 colors,
Mm,
and I've had all cards that I would be happy to play in a deck. It hasn't been until I've gotten to pack two and seen what came from the right,
mm,
what came from the left, that I made a decision.
yeah.
Okay, I'm in 5 colors. It's the end of pack one.
Hmm.
I've clearly got a rare or two that I picked up that I'm happy about. I've got great uncommons, but they're all spread all over the place. I don't have a clear direction yet. And then I open pack two, it gives me something, and then the person to my left passes me something that I'm like, oh, edict.
My eyes are
Okay,
open.
now we're doing this. This is what we're doing. We're
Yeah,
committed, and that's where you kind of like you identify what's there and you jump on it. And
absolutely.
I think in particularly in foundations, not necessarily in play boosters in general, but it's very important to identify as quickly as possible what the people to your left and right don't care about,
Mm,
and decide whether you yourself want to jump ship. Even
hmm.
if you start out, oh well, this is a great card and I'll hate draft it or something.
Hmm.
There's a lot of,
Hmm.
oh, you should never hate draft and whatever. But I always like to say that if you hate draft hard enough,
Hmm.
that becomes your plan and that's what you're doing. You know what I
That's
mean?
true. That's true.
So
So if you were to give draft boosters a grade between 1 to 10, with 10 being the best and one being something you would never want to play with, and then play boosters, 10 being the best product that Wizards has ever released, and a one being something that you're disgusts you and you would never want Wizards to continue this path. How do you feel about the play boosters and draft boosters now that they're gone? And what grades would you give them?
I would probably be lame and I would give both of them a 7. And I would
A
say
seven,
that
okay.
which one is good is largely format contextual. So you
Mm-hmm.
have to take bonus sheets into account, like
Mm-hmm.
Brothers War. I thought Brothers War was
Thunder
sweet.
Junction.
Thunder Junction. You have to
Yep.
take bonus sheets into account when you talk about things like that.
Yep.
And
Didn't Pyrexia also have a bonus sheet?
I believe so, but I
Pyrexia
could
all
be
would be
wrong.
one.
My memory is,
Mm-hmm.
boomer memory. We're already on a new set. I've forgotten everything that happened in Duskmorn. Forget about my terrible win rate. I am
Yeah.
I am
I
steamrolling
love
right now.
Duskmorn.
We're just going to keep the win train going.
Yeah, I really, speaking of wind trains, talking about our credentials a little bit. I mean, we're Friday Night Magic Warriors. We go to a lot of drafts. We go to sealed events. The highest level I've ever achieved on Arena is Diamond, for drafting purposes. And then I've played against several streamers and Magic content creators and done well. But really, like with limited, you do have to play quite a bit to get pretty good at it, and I'm still learning. I'm still growing. What are your credentials like? How good are you at limited versus other types of magic? And not maybe this is a time to like toot your own horn and say, yeah, I am pretty good at this game.
I wouldn't say that. I would say the more I learn about Magic, the more I realize what I don't know.
Mm,
And so it's trying to continue to learn and grow and develop those skills because Magic
mm-hmm.
is a really complex game. Magic is the
It
most
sure is.
complex game ever. I would argue it is the
Yes.
greatest game ever, but it is
Mm-hmm.
exponentially complex. And so for me, it's always trying to root out weaknesses in my own game and what I
Mm,
can do to improve those because I'm very much a one or two trick pony. I'm the identify what the best thing to do is. I talked about rock paper. I talked about rock paper scissors. I'm the guy that figures out what rock is the first week,
mm-hmm.
and I pound that rock into the ground. That rock is a
Hit the rocks,
pebble. It
Paul.
is sand, and I
Yeah.
am very slow to move to figuring out what is paper, what is scissors, where do things go from there. And that's my biggest weakness, since the biggest hurdle that I try and overcome as a player is being able
Yeah.
to get to that next tier.
Right. So there's two things there that I kind of want to talk about when it comes to limited. One is limited metagame. There are going to be better decks than others in each set. There are some sets that have very strong Izzet. There's some very strong Golgari. I was very happy in Thunder Junction. Gruul was very heavily supported, and Green was very heavily supported in Thunder Junction. There are some sets like Duskmorn where there are a handful of colors that work together, and there's one color that stands out above the rest. And so, when it comes to drafting, I find that experimentation is very fun for me. It lets me kind of play around and flex my brain and see if I can try and make something like a rooms deck work. To try and make something like, a 5 color gates deck work, or if there's good fixing, maybe try and play 4 color. Um, but it takes a lot of pieces to come together to do that. And you have to know when to try to do that, because if you go into it and you try and force it, it's going to fail, because the pieces that you need for that plan to come through are not going to be there. And so you have to pick your spots very carefully. However, in watching the Magic World Championships and watching a lot of content creators, I've learned that the best players in the world value cards differently. I'll give a quick example. I played against Sam Black a little while ago, during Caverns of Ixalan, and he was playing a Caves deck, and I had never tried the Caves deck. The Caves deck was all these caves that entered tapped, and there were a few payoffs, like things like uh, Calamitous Cave In. There was a bat card that made bats for each cave that you had. There were a few payoffs for it that were really, really good if you could make it work. But there were a few cards that you needed to make it work, such as Splunking. There were a few other things that like untapped your land so that they came in untapped, so you weren't behind on mana. And the way that he played this control 5-color cave control deck, I was just trying to hit him with a bunch of vampires, and it seemed like with the availability of his card draw, his control elements, and his ability to kind of predict what he needed in the moment to get to there, it's on a different level. The ability to actually build these types of decks and make them work. He's a very, very, very good player, Sam Black is, and he's able to make things work because when he's drafting, he sees the pieces that he needs for what he's trying to achieve and takes them over other things that are potentially better, but it's all about where you're taking these pieces and when you're taking these pieces.
There's lots of formats though. Sorry, not to interrupt your train
No,
of
of
thought,
course.
but there are a lot of formats like Innistrad, for example. OG Innistrad had the spider spawning deck.
Mm-hmm.
I like formats that have a weird brew like that.
Yeah.
Dampened Thought and Champions of Kamigawa and the first Modern Masters was also interesting, where you're just splicing Dampened Thought onto all these arcane spells and trying to mill your opponent out. And those archetypes are cool and fun, and I appreciate them. I would love to see one every set because I think it adds another layer to the draft experience, because it really does reward the Sam Blacks of the world who can identify that, hey, this is a weird kind of deck. It might not be the best necessarily unless all the right pieces come together, and it's identifying when you are in the right seat to make that happen.
That's right. And the other thing too is, the level of skill that he had when he was piloting it was better than me. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm a good player, but I'm not on that level. And he just kind of had like a sixth sense, so to speak, of what to do, when to trade his stuff off, when to play, a certain thing for, this kind of value or that kind of value. That's what we're here to talk about. Like, really, on this podcast, we want to talk about value. We want to talk about our favorite commons and uncommons. We want to talk about removal. We want to talk about trends and things that we're seeing in the game.
So the big question for me for this episode to kind of share with people is, why play limited? I'm going to keep harping on that probably every episode we do, is why play limited? It's A, because it's Magic the Gathering, and Magic the Gathering is the best game ever. It's B,
it is.
Limited Magic is kind of the essence of Magic the Gathering. It's unique. The original Magic the Gathering.
There's nothing else like it. Pokemon doesn't have this. Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have this. I just think that limited Magic and drafting it's great. It's really great. It uses every part of your brain, and showing up to Friday night to draft with your friends is my favorite part of the week.
And it's Magic as Dr. Garfield intended, It's when they play tested Magic, they were basically playing sealed. One of the original playtesters was the guy who came up with the idea of booster draft. His name was Barry Wright. He did an interview for Rosewater's Strive to Work podcast talking about inventing booster draft as one of the many topics they touched on. If you think about Magic all the way back to the beginning, that's what Magic was. I like that it levels the playing field.
It does.
You don't have to take money into account. You don't have to take, I figured out
the people's game.
Yeah, exactly.
Got $25 in a dream.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a fantastic intro to Limited, a little bit about our backgrounds, and I can't wait to see where we go in the next episode. Are you excited for what's coming out soon with Ether Drift and Innistrad Remastered?
Fast and the Furious, the set, I'm excited.
It's all about family.
I really love the playtest card Unicycle, which
Mm,
is an equipment and a
everybody loves a
vehicle.
unicycle.
And if there is not an equipment vehicle in Aether Drift, I'm going to be very
Mm.
sad. But we'll see.
I just can't wait to see the hipster unicycle juggler. Because that's coming.
I just want to see. I just want to see a card that says now this is Aether Drifting.
It's going to be some sort of flavor text. Maybe some guy named Fall Palker or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, and we'll be doing this weekly. You can hear us on Apple and on Spotify to start. So make sure you like and subscribe.
And if you enjoyed this episode, let us know what you want to hear. This is very much going to be a podcast of the people that chime in and say, hey, this is what we want to hear you talk about, because
Absolutely,
there's a lot
yeah,
of limited podcasts out there. You have a plethora of choices. If you want to spend time listening to us, we want to know what you want to hear us talk about. So
absolutely.
throw those
Also,
ideas to us.
get ready for some giveaways. We're planning on having a listener segment. So if you want to join us and submit some questions for us, as well as stay tuned for some giveaways, we'll definitely be sharing details on that in the next few podcasts. All right.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
If people want to get at me with stuff, they can find me on Blue Sky. Camo
Mm.
Paul J, Comeau Paul J. Hit me up. We'll talk about magic.
Thank you all for listening. If you like the episode, please like and share. It helps us a lot. If you want to stay up to date with the latest episode, you can follow us on Instagram at pick1pack1pod or shoot us an email, pick1pack1pod@gmail.com. That's PICK, the number one, PACK, the number one, pod@gmail.com. You can also find us on Blue Sky at pick1pack1pod. We're going to move to the end step, pass the turn, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.